Let's start to discuss about my paper, the paper that I wrote with Lucia Meloni, Michael Pitts, and my supervisor Riyad Mudrik. And its name is The Consciousness Theory Studies, or the Contrast Database for Analyzing and Comparing Empirical Studies of Consciousness. And specifically, this whole project revolves the big question of how our brains give rise to a subjective experience. And as you all probably know, there are different theories that have been suggesting different frameworks to answer this question. And specifically, each of these frameworks suggest the different processes and neural substrates are the ones who are crucial for consciousness. And importantly for us in this project, what we found is that this trend of new theories continuing to emerge without older theories being eliminated seems to be quite prominent. And we thought that this trend could also hinder attempts towards convergence towards an agreed upon theory for consciousness. And that was the starting point of our journey here. And what we try to do here is to try to think first before diving into all of this work, providing this overview. What we try to do is identify different aspects that might, again, contribute to the lack of convergence in our field. And specifically, we identified several such factors. From there, we started and defined our aims. So let's remind ourselves with our starting point. So what we specifically identified is first that there seems to be a limited crosstalk between the theories. And by limited crosstalk, what I mean is that the theories kind of seem to progress in parallel. So we don't usually see theories testing the predictions of other theories. We mainly see papers that are more focused on the predictions of individual theories. And we thought that this could hinder attempts towards convergence. We also thought that, at least at the point of view, a point in time in which we started to write this project and overview, we found that the reviews that are written and are trying to make sense of a wide range of findings and try to provide overviews of all the findings in the field are usually written by actually the same people who are actually lead the theories themselves. So they are written from the standpoint of individual theories. And we wondered whether a neutral standpoint with regard to the findings in the field could provide some better way in order to make progress towards convergence. And lastly, as I guess you all know, there are many ways in which we can study consciousness. So there are many methodological choices that we as researchers of consciousness make when we conduct studies of consciousness. And we wanted to understand how these different methods to study consciousness, the different paradigms and the different focuses on specific aspects of consciousness might then affect the way we interpret our results in light of the different theories. And again, as I said, according to these different aspects that we identified, that we had intuition about, we wanted to define different aims or goals that we wanted to explore in this overview and this project. And specifically, we listed our different aims here. So let's go over them one by one. And the first thing we wanted to achieve is to understand why theories are not being eliminated. And for that, the more specific question we wanted to ask is if theories are even put to the test. Then we wanted to examine our initial intuition that the field is fractionated in the sense that the theories do not seem to interact that much between each other, but mainly focus on the specific predictions of each theory in isolation. Then with regard to our observation that reviews are mostly written from the standpoint of individual theories, we wanted to see what would an overview that is detached from the specific lens of the theories would provide, what would it reveal regarding the main trends in our field. And lastly, as I said, we wanted to kind of understand how the methodological choices that we make might affect the outcomes of our studies with regard to the theories. And the first step we took in order to answer this question is first to limit our search. So as I just tried to present to you, there are lots of theories of consciousness and there are lots of important theories of consciousness. And we do not intend here to really provide an overview about all of them because just practically it would take so much time. And this project, as I said and discussed with Benedetta just before this seminar started, it was already quite lengthy. And so we started this journey by focusing on the four theories that we consider to be the more leading theories of consciousness, and specifically global neuronal workspace, or GNW, higher order theories, or HOTS, integrated information theory, or IIT, and recurrent processing theory, or RPT. And at least according to this study by Michel et al., 2018, where they conducted an informal internet survey, and they asked specifically here with regard to this specific figure, they asked their participants what is the most leading, the most promising theory of consciousness according to their own opinion, and you can see that these four theories did pop up. So it's not like really an evidence for these theories being the leading theories of the field, but it does suggest in some way that these are the more popular ones. So we wanted to focus on them, and maybe this could also help us understand the field in more general terms. And before diving into what we did and all of the analysis that we conducted and the papers that we collected, let me just first try to define some of the core ideas of these different theories. And by that, I do not mean to really fully describe all of them or try to describe all of their hypotheses or all of their ideas. What I would like to do is just provide some background for you to understand what these theories are about, and try to see some of the differences between them, maybe some of the commonalities between them as well. So the first theory I would like to review here is GNW, and GNW is actually based on an earlier cognitive model by Bernard Bars. And it's more like a neural adaptation of this cognitive model. And specifically, according to GNW, conscious processing is a process in which information that is processed in specialized models, specialized and isolated models, is then globally shared across the brain. And just to demonstrate what I mean by globally sharing information across the brain, we can think about a specialized model, such as the FFA, or fusiform phase area, sorry. Which is sensitive to phase stimuli. And according to this theory, this information about the phase will remain unconscious and unconsciously processed until it will be broadcasted by the global neuronal workspace. And the first step into reaching broadcasting across the brain is the phase of mobilization. And specifically in this stage, information that is encoded in such specialized models is mobilized to the global neuronal workspace via bidirectional connections between these specialized models, specifically here the FFA, and neurons in the neural workspace, which consists mostly of pyramidal neurons in the prefrontal cortex, but also consists of other neurons in other areas in the frontoparietal network and some other temporal areas, which together compose a quite widespread a widespread network of areas connected via long-range connections. And specifically after this stage of mobilizing the information to the workspace, ignition takes place. And ignition is a core mechanism in GNW. Specifically, it's describing a nonlinear process in which information that enters the workspace then activates distant parts of it, as you can see here in the demonstration. And this complex pattern then encodes for the content that is being perceived. And it is hypothesized that this process of ignition takes place at around 200 and 300 milliseconds, more to the higher end of this range. And this is relative to the presentation of a certain stimulus, in our example, for example, seeing a certain face. And only then, after this information becomes widely broadcasted, it becomes accessible to other specialized models. And one of these models is the one that is important for report, and specifically self-report, which at this stage in which information becomes available for self-report, it is also consciously perceived. And according to these properties of this theory, we can see that global neuronal workspace considers the frontal part of the brain as crucial for consciousness, as well as the function of global sharing of information. And another group of theories which also supports and considers the frontal part of the brain as crucial for consciousness is higher order theories. And higher order theories are actually a group of theories with different variants. Yet a common hypothesis of these different theories is that according to them, consciousness actually depends on meta-representing information that is encoded in first order areas. So we can again think back about the FFA, which encodes for sensory information about the face. This information, according to higher order theories, will remain unconscious until it will be re-represented, and specifically re-represented by specific sub-areas within the prefrontal cortex. And different variants have their own specifics regarding which meta-representations are needed for a certain stimulus to be consciously perceived, and which specific subparts of the prefrontal cortex are the most crucial ones. Another important aspect of these theories is the dissociation between task performance and conscious experience itself. And specifically, very much in line with what global neuronal workspace would predict. First order representations may indeed be amplified and broadcasted to wide areas across the brain. Yet this aspect is mainly important for behavior and task performance, while the meta-representations in the prefrontal cortex are the ones who are actually crucial and sufficient for conscious perception and subjective reports. So regarding higher order theories, again, the theory puts more emphasis more specifically on the prefrontal cortex and specifically on the function of meta-representations in consciousness. Moving on to our third theory, so higher order theories are actually usually contrasted with first order theories. And for first order theories, actually the first order representations are sufficient for consciousness. And recurrent processing theory is one such theory, first order theory. And more specifically, according to recurrent processing theory or RPT, localized recurrent processing loops in sensory areas are sufficient for consciousness. And this would mean that feed-forward processing of, for example, in our case, faces in sensory areas might indeed result in unconscious processing of face stimuli and might lead to corresponding behaviors. Yet only when the recurrent processing loops between higher order sensory areas and lower order sensory areas, as well as computations that are reliant on horizontal connections, only then when those processes kick in, consciousness processing also exhibits itself. Another important factor here is that the recurrent processes that I described are associated with a certain function, and specifically with the function of integrating and organizing the perceptual contents that is encoded in the lower sensory areas into a conscious unified percept. And lastly, what I would say is that in contrast to the previous theories, this theory actually considers the posterior part of the brain as crucial for consciousness, and specifically the sensory cortices themselves, which are considered to be sufficient for consciousness, while the frontal part of the brain is actually supporting more of the attentional and introspective processes, which are according to this theory are actually conflated with phenomenal consciousness itself, which the theory tries to explain. And lastly, to our last theory, integrated information theory. This theory actually, similarly to what I described about recurrent processing theory, is more focused on the phenomenological part of consciousness. And this theory actually proposes to start with an axiomatic phenomenology first approach. And in this approach, this theory is basing its postulates on axioms derived from introspection and are claimed to be intuitively true in some sense, and fully capture every possible phenomenal experience that we can have. And as I said, from these axioms that are derived from phenomenology directly, this theory derives different postulates about how a physical system that can implement all of these axioms together should be structured. And one specific consequence of this approach is that according to the axioms of integrated information theory, experience is both integrated and differentiated. And accordingly, so should be the physical system that realizes this conscious experience. And this would mean that also the physical substrates of a conscious system should be unified in the same way, which means that the parts of the system are both affecting and being affected by each other. And using the specific mathematical formulations of this theory, we can at least theoretically unfold the entire full conceptual structure of this system in a certain state, which is hypothesized to be completely identical with experience, and explain also the level of consciousness or the quantity of consciousness, which is measured by the famously known phi. Lastly, according to the anatomical properties of the posterior cortex, this theory considers the posterior hot zone as crucial for consciousness, and specifically the posterior hot zone includes areas in the parietal, occipital, and temporal areas of the brain. And this together kind of closes this introductory background regarding the theories. So just having in mind some aspects by which these theories differ, or maybe some aspects in which they are relating to each other. And at this stage, I want to get into the project that we did with regard to these theories. And let's first try to remind ourselves with the specific goals we have. So what we want to explain, and specifically, first, we want to understand why theories are not being eliminated. And for that, we want to ask if theories are even put to the test. Then we want to examine if our intuition that the field is fractionated is indeed justified, if data can substantiate it or whether it can challenge it. We also wanted to provide a neutral overview of the findings in the field that is in some way detached from the specific viewpoint of individual theories. And lastly, we wanted to see how the methods that we use to study consciousness might affect our final interpretations with regard to these theories. And so to answer all of these fancy questions, we actually collected papers and we used different search strategies, searching for papers that interpreted their findings in light of these four theories. So because we focused only on them. And specifically what we did, the two search strategies that we had is first to try to pick 3 key papers for each of these theories and collect all of the papers that cited these key papers. And our second search strategy was just to search the name of the theories in the title, abstract, or keywords of all of the papers that we can find using the Scopus database. At a later stage, we filtered out all of the papers that were not neuroscientific in nature, meaning that they did not report using TMS, fMRI, EEG, and so on, and neuroscientific tool. We also filtered out all of the papers that did not interpret the findings in light of one of these theories, and also papers that did not focus on consciousness. This overall yielded 365 papers, reporting 312 different experiments. And each of these different 412 different experiments was then classified according to different parameters of interest. And we have lots of such parameters. And this process involved manually just classifying each of these different parameters. I will not tell you about all of them, but I will give you some examples. So we did encode the experimental paradigm that was used to manipulate consciousness. So for example, if it was a study focused on state consciousness, we classified the specific anesthetic drugs that were used, for example, or disorders of consciousness. If it was an experiment focusing on on content consciousness, we classified whether it used masking, CFS, and so on. And we also classified the different findings that relate to consciousness. We classified the different stimuli that were used, if stimuli were used in this specific experiment, the neuroscientific tool that was used, and very much importantly, the interpretations of the researchers taken at face value with regard to the different theories. So for each of the theories, we classified whether it supports or challenges each of these theories or remain neutral with regard to it. And then using these classifications, we return to our questions and ask different questions about the field of consciousness studies. And to remind you, the first question was if theories are even put to the test, trying to understand or gain insight towards the question of why we don't see theories being eliminated. And so when we analyze all of the papers in our database, reminding you that there are 412 different experiments here, what we first wanted to see is how the papers distribute with regard to the theories in terms of supporting and challenging the different theories. And as you can see here, the most studied theory, as well as the most supported one, was global neuronal workspace. We also found that higher order theories were actually not represented in as much as other theories. And so it seems like this theory was not investigated empirically as much as other theories, although we did find quite a lot of theoretical papers with regard to higher order theories. This was not the case for empirical studies, and here we only included empirical studies. And lastly, and probably most importantly, what we can learn here is that the vast majority of studies and experiments that we found were actually supporting the theories rather than challenge them. And this trend seemed to us very important if we're interested in the question of why theories are not being eliminated. So we decided to investigate it further. And specifically, we tried to look if we see that experiments actually are a priori designed to test theory predictions in the first place, meaning if they are theory driven. And this is in contrast to other classifications that we had, a paper that could be indeed a priori designed to test theory predictions, or it could also be just mentioning one of the theories in the introduction and then interpreting the results in light of the theories without really defining a priori a test for a prediction of the theories. Or as you can see here, the majority of papers were actually post hoc interpreted in light of the theories. So in these cases, the authors did not even mention the theories in their introduction, but later on in the discussion, they interpreted their findings in light of the theories. And this pattern seemed important to us. We investigated this finding further. And as you can see here, when we looked only at experiments that did not challenge any theory at all, only supported theories or remained neutral with regard to them, what you can see here is that most experiments were actually post hoc interpreting their findings in light of the theories, which kind of makes sense. But maybe more important for our case here, we found that when we did look at the remaining papers, meaning experiments that did challenge at least one theory, you can see that the vast majority of these papers were actually theory driven, meaning that they were a priori designed to test theories predictions. And with these results in mind, we kind of summarized our conclusions with regard to the question of why theories are not being eliminated. And we think that the tendency to support the theories rather than challenge them, and also the lack of theory-driven experiments, which are kind of connected, according at least to what we see, may give us some insights towards this question. And we decided to continue to our next question, and specifically we wanted to investigate our intuition regarding the fractionation of our field. And before showing you the results, let's just think, how would the results look like if the theories were in fact interacting with each other? And this is just a demonstration of how the results would look like, at least according to how we see it. So here you can see two different graphs that describe the number of experiments, the cumulative number of experiments, let's say mentioning two theories, so one in pink and one in blue. And you can see that up to a certain stage, these theories kind of progress in parallel, both gaining information kind of in a similar way. Then when one theory starts to thrive, as you can see here with the pink theory, we would expect that if the theories were interacting, the level of attention that the other theory would receive would actually decrease up to a stage in which it will completely plateau. And at this stage, we would consider it, at least according to some sense, as an eliminated theory. And then when we return to our results and we looked at different graphs, so what you can see here is that the distribution of the cumulative number of experiments mentioning each of the theories, meaning either supporting or challenging them. Also, when we looked at experiments supporting the theories or challenging them, we found a very similar picture. And at least according to our analysis, it doesn't look like when one theory starts to thrive, other theories start to plateau. According to how we understand these results, we do see here evidence that suggests that the theories progress in parallel. It doesn't look like when one theory gains more attention, other theories are getting less attention. And according to how we see these results, we think that these suggest actually that the field is indeed fractionated, according to at least to some extent. We do see parallel progress of the theories and only minimal interactions between them. And again, with these results in mind, we continue to our next aim. And what we wanted to do is understand what are the trends and findings of the field that we can see from, let's say, a bird's eye view on the field, detached from the specific standpoint of individual theories. But here, before showing you the results, it's important to know that this is not a meta-analysis. We did not try to uncover the true neural correlates of consciousness or of some sort in this way. We only try to understand how the experimenters understand the results and tie them back to the theories. And so we mainly just took all of the findings together and plotted them, just counted them and plotted them as they are. We did not try to assess the reliability of the findings or the robustness of the designs of the experimenters. So just take this result as they are, sorry. And these are the results, at least here in the spatial domain. Here taking all of the findings that were gathered using fMRI across our database, coloring the different findings and the different areas according to the supported area in each of the experiments, with the color intensity indicating just the frequency of reporting a certain area within each theory. So, for example, here, this area is red because it was relatively reported more than other theories in experiments supporting global neuronal workspace, which is red here. And what you can see is that almost the entire brain lights up, meaning that there is a lot of heterogeneity in the reported areas that are related to consciousness. And this happens to be the case both when we analyze all of the experiments together or when we analyze only experiments that are focused on content consciousness. Yet, perhaps even more strikingly, when we do split the database according to the supported theory, so in each of these plots, we only included experiments that support each of the specific theory here. What you can see is the patterns align pretty well, not perfectly, but pretty well with the predictions of the theories themselves. And so when we continued and tried to ask whether this is unique to the spatial findings, we also decided to explore findings in the temporal domain. And specifically here, we included all of the papers that were using EEG, MEG, or intracranial recordings in order to investigate questions with regard to the temporal grain of consciousness or for the temporal correlates of consciousness. So in these kind of experiments, you usually present a certain stimulus, and then you ask what would be the first neural correlates that you could tie back to the specific stimulus that you present being consciously perceived. And what you can see here is that, again, there is quite a lot of heterogeneity in the results. But when we split the database according to the supported theory, we see quite a good correspondence with the predictions of the theories, at least in the sense that findings that were reported as supporting global neuronal workspace show later onsets compared to recurrent processing theory, which is in accordance with the theory's predictions. So from here, from this overview, what we learned is that when we do conduct an overview of the findings in the field in a way that is detached from the specific standpoint of individual theories, we mostly found that the results are very heterogeneous and at least not easily explained by individual theories. And moving on to our last aim here, remind you again, what we wanted to do here is to understand how the diverse methods to study consciousness are actually interacting or possibly affecting the supported theory. What we did here is use a random forest classifier, and we tried to predict the support of each of these theories, except for higher order theories, because as I've shown you, we just didn't have enough data for making meaningful interpretations regardless of the results that we get. So we use the random forest classifier. And what we try to do is predict based solely on methodological choices of researchers. So the paradigms that were used, the neuroscientific tools that were used, and so on, and not knowing anything about the findings, what would be the outcome in terms of supporting each of these theories. And what we found is, as you can see here, that our classifier was above chance, and chance here is not defined just as 50% in guessing just what would be the supported theory. Here we define chance according just to the marginal distribution of supporting each of these theories. As I've shown you, the theories were not supported in a uniform manner. There were theories that were more supported than others, and the classifier could just pick this feature and use it for a classification. But even when considering this specific aspect, still our classifier was above chance. But what we cannot learn about from these results is what are the specific parameters that actually influence this classification performance. And we tried to do this analysis, and specifically we revealed different factors that were considered important for our classifier. And the first and most important factor that we found is that most of the experiments in support of integrated information theory were actually focusing on state consciousness as opposed to content consciousness. And this was pretty prominent. We also found that integrated information theory was most supported by experiments using no report paradigms compared to report paradigms. We also found that for global neuronal workspace, actually, which might be kind of surprising. Yet, when we limited this analysis to experiments that focus on content consciousness, this pattern kind of diminished in a pretty prominent way. And so you can see that there is still quite some differences, but these two factors, state and content consciousness and report and no-report paradigms, are very much correlated. We also found less important, but still important factors. Specifically, we found that experiments that were conducting experiments focusing on content consciousness and using subjective measures of consciousness were more frequently used actually for integrated information theory. And we found that connectivity analysis was used more in experiments supporting global neuronal workspace or integrated information theory compared to recurrent processing theory, although I think that connectivity seems to be pretty much important for all of these theories. So from these results, we did find that there are some ways in which the methodological choices of researchers seem to imply which theory will be supported. And we try to convey which specific factors are responsible, at least in our database, for that being the case. So that kind of concludes where we ended up with in terms of the specific project that we conducted. And we tried to think about way forward in light of the different findings that we gathered here. And the first thing that we noticed is that the field calls for theory-driven experiments. And here, I do not mean necessarily for experiments that really try to compare the predictions of opposing predictions of different theories in the same experiment, which is kind of hard to do, but we will see some examples of cases in which it is possible. Also, experiments that just are theory-driven in the sense of trying to examine the predictions of one theory can make can show progress to the field, as we saw that they are mostly are the ones who lead to theories being challenged, which seems to be crucial if we want to make progress in our field. So specifically focusing on challenging the theories, but also on trying to integrate between ideas seem crucial to us. Any kind of integration or interaction between them seems important, rather than trying to continue and accumulate positive evidence in support of the different theories. What we've done, I hope that you will be able to see it. Let me try to stop the share here and do another share because I had some problems. So let's see here. So we also created a website in which we shared the database that we created, trying to enable you as researchers to conduct your own queries on this database, trying to understand the patterns that you think are more important than the ones we ended up reporting. So for example, you can choose specific paradigms and whether you want to focus on experiments using report or no report paradigms, and see, for example, the specific populations that were involved in the studies, and you can see how these distribute. You can also save the results to a file to see which are the specific papers that populated these graphs, which could be helpful in some ways. We also included different interactive graphs that try to compare between different theories based on specific parameters, so you can play with it if you think it will be helpful for you. So there are lots of different graphs here. Some of them were used to create the graph that you saw here. And we also added this map of the world, which we might look here what happens in Belgium. So it seems like, at least here in the seminar, I would predict that global neuronal workspace theory would be the most supported one. So we want to further expand this website, but currently that's the stage at which we're at. Just before finishing here and continuing to the discussion, I wanted to mention one important thing to have in mind. So we kind of advocated here for directly comparing the theories in the experimental arena, but as this great work by Signorelli et al. Showed, it's not always easy to do that, and specifically, it might also be impossible in some sense in some of the cases. So here, what we can see here is that even the 4 different theories that we try to compare here seem to be different across different dimensions, and here the dimensions are according to the specific philosophical and theoretical commitments and assumptions that these theories make, which make it very hard to test them directly in the experimental arena. But as you probably have already heard, the Cogitate Consortium has actually taken this endeavor as a main project of his, and it seems like they did reach some kind of agreement between the theory leaders on specific predictions that they have. We still don't know how this would affect our field, but I do think that this is the kind of theory-driven experiment that might lead to progress in our field. And importantly, this adversarial collaboration project is huge and requires quite a lot of resources. And I don't want to make this intimidating in the sense that you need all of these resources always in order to make such theory-driven experiments. There are also other experiments. For example, here in Vishne et al., they have reanalyzed data that was originally analyzed and acquired regardless of the theories, with other research questions in mind. And after publishing this adversarial collaboration project with the predictions of the theories, the authors here directed their analysis to integrated information theory and global neuronal workspace predictions. And this might mean that in some cases we can just shift our focus to the theories without the need of all of the resources that are required for such adversarial collaboration in order to provide evidence that could help our field progress and these theories to progress. So just final words, I just want to say lots of thanks to Liad Mudrik, which is a supervisor and which was very much involved in all of this project, both practically and as a supervisor, and also to Lucia Meloni and Michael Pitts, which were collaborators here and helped a lot, and to the lab of Liad Mudrik, which was also part of this journey. So thank you a lot to you for, first of all, for inviting me here and also for hearing this talk. I hope it was interesting.